The views and opinions expressed during Eye on the Triangle do not represent WKNC or NC State student media. Your dial is currently tuned to Eye on the Triangle on WKNC 88.1 FM HD1. Thanks for listening. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your day. My name is Emilia Rivadeneira, host of Eye on the Triangle, and with further ado, let's get into some news. Hello and welcome to WKNC's Eye on the Triangle, your source of local news, where we dive deep into the pressing issues affecting our communities. I'm your host, Emilia Rivadeneira, and here with me today is Shannon McGregor, Associate Professor and Director of the PhD program at the Hussman School of Journalism and Media at UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you so much for being here today, Shannon. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's dive into just social media and its impact that just it has had on the elections in general, specifically just the 2024 election. And my first question for you today is just kind of what role do you believe social media plays in shaping the political landscape, especially during election season?
Yeah, so we know that a lot of people, especially younger people, turn to social media to get political information, right? So during a campaign, especially, there's people are more interested in politics, right? When there's a
Yeah.
election coming up, but also there's more information, right? Because campaigns are putting it out, news is covering it more, and all of those are reflected on social media. And that can be a really good thing if people are getting good quality information. And, in a lot of ways, sometimes simple little engagements on social media can lead to people becoming more interested, more involved in politics. But again, that can be good or bad depending on the quality of that information, the type of activity, you know what I mean, that they're getting involved in, and whether it's sort of, on the more pro-democratic side based on real true information, or if it's on the other side of things.
Right. Yeah. And what are some of the key trends that you have observed in how candidates from each party are utilizing just social media in this election cycle?
Yeah. In some ways I would say it's looking very a little bit different between parties, especially at the top of the ticket, right? So thinking about the presidential candidates, um, the Kamala Harris campaign, Tim Walz campaign have been very active, for example, on TikTok, very active, like their team is like clipping videos, whether it's from their rallies or something that, Donald Trump said, it seems like in like, a second, and producing those very sort of short form. I mean, there are longer videos on TikTok, but very much like the sort of short form videos, from their
Yeah.
campaign. And that seems to have done really well, right? Like they're getting a lot of engagement. People are, resharing them, et cetera. I think the Trump campaign on social media has been much more active. Certainly, of course, the candidate himself on his social media platform, True Social. But I would say a sort of unofficial, but in some ways it seems official, arm of the campaign has been Elon Musk and others on X, formerly Twitter, since Elon Musk bought it. Used to be a pretty bipartisan sort of social media site, but now it's led by someone, it's owned and led by someone who is really associated with the far right, and that reflects the content of the platform now reflects that.
Right. Yeah. And you brought something that I was going to ask about, and it's just like, yeah, for example, we see Harris and Waltz using TikTok, and there's also like influencers endorsement. We have seen like the big one that I remember always is just Taylor Swift posted
Mm-hmm.
her endorsement for Harris and Waltz. And how does like the role of just like this like influencers affect just the younger votes and like younger generations kind of like talking about the turnout? Because it, does it even have an effect or an impact?
Yeah, so we actually have some research just on social media in general in terms of how it impacts turnout. So, this is from a couple cycles ago, obviously, because I'm going to talk about Facebook.
Yeah.
But Facebook used to have a feature where you could like check in as having voted. And then if you were a person who hadn't done that, when you logged on, it would say like, 432 of your friends have voted. Have you like make a plan here? And it would link to like a place where you could see, like if you were registered in your polling place.
Right.
Um, and there was a research project on that and showed that that absolutely increased turnout. So that sort of social pressure of like you're seeing that your friends,
Yeah.
people in your social network have done it, we know does increase turnout. That I think is still the case with people posting, still like kind of voting selfies. I feel like the version of that, at least on the left this year, is like the sort of TikTok trend of like canceling out my, Republican dad or husbands or
Yeah,
whatever vote.
I've seen
Even
that.
though it's usually like just kidding, he's not, but
Yeah.
still like it's like I feel like this cycle's version of like the voting booth selfie, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but back to talking about like how it increases engagement when these influencers, I mean, that's the goal, right? Is that again, these are people in, users, social networks. So we know that already can increase turnout. But then it's also kind of taking it up a level, right? Because it's these
Right.
sort of very famous or influential people. Um, and I'll have to say, like, I think that's also the strategy that both the campaigns to a certain extent, but I would say the Trump campaign even more, have adopted with podcasts as well. Across podcasts and social media, there's a concept in our field that we call a parasocial relationship that people can develop with. It's not someone they actually know, but it's like a TV
Yeah.
personality or a podcast host or an influencer where you feel like you know them, right? Because it's these sort of intimate spaces, and you are more likely to, be into what that person suggests or
Yeah.
does, right? And so, I think that's the sort of model with having influencers, endorse, share things about it. And that's everywhere from Taylor Swift to like more of these, what, we might call like micro influencers who certainly don't have the platform, right,
Hmm.
that Taylor Swift has, but are really influential within the community that, they're a part of.
Yeah. Um, and talking a little bit more about just like local elections and like just state elections, like how, in your just opinion, like the social media, like how does that affect just local elections? We have talked about the presidential, like both candidates, but
Mm-hmm.
now talking about like candidates like the governors, just like their them being using social media, how does that impact the elections as well?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly less financially expensive for a campaign to buy social media ads, to invest in even a social media team or a firm that helps you with organic content than
Yep.
it is to buy a television ad, right? You can target specific groups of people, that you may be trying to motivate to get out, to vote. And so, especially for down ballot races, right? Sort of state level races. That's a tactic that campaigns are certainly engaging in.
Hmm.
I think because there's so much attention in the presidential year, sometimes that can have a harder can be a little bit harder to break through on the
Yeah.
organic side of things, especially in sort of an algorithmic way. It can be a little bit different with targeted advertising because you're paying, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
sort of get in front of folks.
Hmm.
But I think we've seen, I think we've seen a more active advertising campaign in our governor race on the Democratic side than on the Republican side. But I think that's also a reflection of, well, both like the quality of the candidates, but also the amount of money that they've raised, right?
Yeah.
Which, really impacts how much you can engage in that as well.
Right. And now looking back at just like previous elections and just kind of comparing the trends, like now I feel like with AI, there's the game kind of has changed regarding social media usage and like just political landscape in general. So just looking back at like for example the 2020 election, um, is there are any like differences and like or even similarities in just like how each candidate like just put themselves out there or used social media that we're kind of like seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some changes that, sort of happen all the time, which is just, different platforms become more popular or less popular, right? And
Yeah.
so I think, we've seen a lot more engagement from candidates, for example, on TikTok in this cycle than we did in 2020 because it's become more popular, because the user base has expanded. Um, and so I think that's one of the changes, certainly another change, at least at the presidential level, but this impacts other Republican candidates, down ballot as well, is now we have this, we have both Truth Social, which Trump owns, which, Trump, but also a lot of other, Republican candidates are using to try and reach people and to try and get their message out. And the difference between Twitter and now X is also, another platform, right? That used to be a pathway that candidates from both parties would use, and now it's, really not very effective, except for everyone, except for Republican candidates. There was a Washington Post story from a couple days ago that looked at the top 100, members of Congress on the Republican side and Democratic side, and they found that Republican members of Congress were getting way more engagement, were clearly just being seen by a
Right.
lot more people, but also it reflects the changing user base, right,
Yeah.
of that platform, in the ensuing years since Elon Musk has bought it. So I think those are, some of the changes. Um, at the risk of being, saying too long of an answer, I also think it's really important to talk about what are some of the policy and team changes that have been made at a lot of the social media platforms since 2020. So, in the run up to 2020, even before the election, the Trump campaign had been spreading this disinformation about voter fraud and the election not being, safe. And so, as a response to that, a lot of the big social media companies, Twitter, Meta properties, had not only policies against, removing electoral disinformation related to like who can vote, how do you vote, things like that. But they had really robust teams of civic integrity, sort of trust and safety teams who were, involved in making some of those really tough moderation decisions about when to remove things. And that, in some ways extended after we saw the continued challenge to the peaceful transfer of power, the attempted, insurrection on January 6th. But since then, most platforms have either, like in the case of X, completely gotten rid of those teams and policies totally, or in the case of the Meta platforms, have gotten rid of a lot of the people who worked on those teams. And so the enforcement of those is even more variable than it was in the past. And so I think that's a really different landscape that we're looking at in terms of the type of social media about the election, the type of content that's going to be that we're already seeing is available on these platforms.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I wanted to touch on and was misinformation in general. Like, again, like bringing AI just generated content. We have seen it like throughout this election season. And just, I wanted to ask you, just like over the past few months and approaching now to like the election, just on Tuesday, how has this affected just the political landscape and this election season, just misinformation being out there in general?
Yeah. So first to touch on the sort of part of it about AI, certainly we have seen, some examples of that. I think the most notable one this cycle was the Trump campaign using these sort of AI generated images to imply that Taylor Swift had endorsed him. Um, but I don't think that was very believable for a lot of people. So I think it really broke through maybe in the way that they were thinking it did. I'm not sure. But I think, we really haven't, I think there were a lot of fears about, generative AI related content and how it might be used to misinform people in this election. And I think we've seen actually a lot less of that than people were worried about in terms of generative AI content. Doesn't mean there's none. It doesn't mean it's not something we should think about, but I think that's been, less of a concern, in terms of deep fakes and kind of things like this than people were worried about. I think the biggest problem around misinformation in this election and on social media as well, although I would say it's not just a social media problem, is the disinformation related to the election. These, things that we know are not true, that election officials, both Republican, Democrat, and nonpartisan, are saying is not true. These charges that there are people who are not citizens who are voting, that there are, that election offices are changing, the
Right.
votes of people who have cast their ballot. a lot of that shows up on social media. A lot of that comes straight out of the mouths of politicians, from the top of the ticket on down in real life, at a stump speech or on TV, but also on social media. But because this particular disinformation narrative has now been going, well, we can go back in history, and it's really like a very, very long time in this country of trying to disenfranchise people through voting disinformation. But let's say in our current era,
Yeah.
since 2020, people are really primed to believe that and look for evidence of that. So, that means that you might see something that's a normal aspect of voting, but because most people don't, I mean, we don't vote all the time, right? And a lot of people only vote every 4 years, right? There are a lot of people who only vote in presidential election years. It might look like something that feels not right to you. And so you think it's electoral fraud, but it's just something that happens, and it's this not bad at all. It's just what elections look like, but you don't engage in them all the time. Or people finding things that are small mistakes, which of course happens when tens of millions of people are voting, but we have a system to find those, you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
fix
Yeah.
those. But because people are primed to believe some of these things and even look for them, it creates this really I think unhealthy atmosphere, and people are sharing these things on social media. There's a group that Elon Musk created on X that has, over 50 or 60,000 people in it that are sharing what they see as examples of, illegal voting or fraud at voting centers. And in the most cases, they're not. But if you look at it, it looks like, oh my gosh, there's all these things, going wrong in this election. And then you hear people that you trust, right? The candidate at the top of the ticket, other leaders saying that this is happening. And it really undermines, the trust that people have in a system that does actually work pretty well.
Yeah. And just what are some strategies that one can take, for example, to just um, get away from that unhealthiness that it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
created in on social media, or just even during like election season with all of like this misinformation being spread around. What are some strategies that, like, I guess us as just citizens can
Mm-hmm.
take?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I think, especially as it relates to social media, if you see any content that misinformation is targeted along lines of identity and emotion, right? So if it's going to be effective with you, it's because it speaks to your identity in some way and it's affective. So if you see content that makes you feel really, really happy, like affirmed in some way, or really, really mad in some way, that's the kind of content that you just want to like take a little pause on before you reshare it. Go look for that kind of information somewhere else, right? And see if it's true or not, because the most successful disinformation does make us have strong feelings, which is why, one of the reasons it's effective. So that is one thing to do. Makes you real happy or real mad, pause, take a breath before you do anything
Yeah.
else.
Hmm.
And I think, as far as it goes sort of more broadly, there's rightfully so. A lot of people have a, pretty considerable anxiety around this election. I
Yeah.
think, at the presidential level, but that, certainly at the state, there's some state level,
Yeah.
reasons that people are going to feel like that as well. I say two things. One, I'm a person who studies journalism and politics. And so I love it and obviously think it's very important. But even I take breaks, and I encourage everyone to do that as you feel like you need to.
Hmm.
If there's something really important, you are going to still hear that or find that information out if you
Yeah.
log back on tomorrow,
Hmm.
so it really is good and important to take some breaks for your for your own sort of like mental
Yeah.
health. Um, and I also, another really useful strategy for dealing with election anxiety, which I had already been telling people, and then I heard a psychologist share this same information on an NPR story yesterday. I was like, okay, good. Um, is to just do something, right? Talk to your family members or friends about if they've voted, help them figure out if they need to about where to vote. Text bank, phone bank, whatever it is, like, because if you're feeling anxious about it, that usually comes from a place of we can't control on our own,
Right.
what's going to happen. And if,
Hmm.
this place of feeling like you're out of control. So do some things you can control, right?
Yeah.
Take some actions so that you have some agency in it. And I think that both of those things are, one's real active and one's real disengaging. And I think a good balance of those things can help people deal with their election anxiety.
Yeah, for sure. Especially like on election day and like on election night, I feel like a lot of people are just waiting for the results, like just waiting on their social media, like just on their phones, like looking at like any information. And so like this advice and like it's really helpful actually because to just kind of like disconnect a
Yeah.
little bit. Hmm.
And I would say, especially about election night, I don't think there is an election night. Like that's something that we had really only for a small amount of time in our
Yeah.
history. But because of both how close elections are now, but also because of changes some states have made that really slow down the voting process or the vote counting process. In ways that I don't think are necessarily helpful, but nonetheless, they have, made these decisions. It means that we're probably unlikely to know on election night the outcome of the election. So I also think it can help people to just try and, we can't change that expectation that's socially and culturally sort of built
Yeah.
up, but
Hmm.
to remind people, it's probably not going to be election night. I don't think it's going to be quite as long as 2020.
Hmm.
Some of that was obviously exacerbated by, we were at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes.
But I think it's very unlikely that we're going to have, a clear idea of who's won the presidential election, at least the presidential election, if not some state races on election night. And so if you just don't have that expectation, I think that can also help ease, the anxiety that you might feel around it. Like it's okay to go to bed because you are probably not going to know tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so this has been a really insightful interview. And I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add about just like, as we're approaching election day related to just state politics or just in general social media and misinformation.
The only thing that I would add is to tell everyone that if you are eligible to vote, to please vote. You know,
Hmm.
Early voting, the last day in our state is Saturday, and after that, you can vote, of course, on election day next Tuesday. Um, and just vote. And if you need information about who you might vote for or how to vote, there's tons of resources for that. And you want to be able to say that you did it. Like if
Yeah.
you're going to be affected in some way by the outcome, and I'd like to say to everyone, you will be, then, make your voice heard, right? Take
Yeah.
this opportunity to make your voice
Yeah.
heard and vote.
Yeah. Um, and one last question that I it just popped out in my head. It So what are some a lot of people after the election, like after just voting, think that like, oh, to make my voice heard, like I just have to wait like for the next like 4 years. What are some ways that like I guess like students or people can still be civically engaged in our communities, even like through social media or just like in general?
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of organizations on every college campus.
Yeah.
For example, that folks can get involved in that are civic organizations. Some are along lines of certain identity groups, right? Like advocating for
Hmm.
members of your community.
Yes.
Some of them may be around certain issues. Get involved in those. If this is something that feels good for you, like get involved in that. I also think another way, that you can get involved, not just every 4 years, is to get involved in, get educated on, which is hard to do because we don't hear a lot about it.
Hmm.
Get educated on and involved in local politics.
Yeah.
Often what happens, even for students at the, in your city or in your town and your county and in our state, has a much greater impact, right, on our
Yeah.
day-to-day lives than what happens at the federal level.
Right.
So you can get involved in that, right? And find out information about it and get involved with that. And that's something that's happening all the time, right?
Yeah.
Cities and towns are making decisions, school boards, et cetera, year round, right? That impact people's lives. So
Yeah.
that's not something that you have to wait every 4 years to get involved in necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today on Eye in the Triangle.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And go vote, everyone. Go vote.
Next on Eye in the Triangle, we have Minnat Syed talking about the history of the North Carolina State Fair and talking with different vendors at the fair about their culture and their diversity.
Hello everyone, this is Minal Said from Eyes on the Triangle. Today we're going to talk about the State Fair since it just ended. But we wanted to talk about the State Fair in a slightly different perspective. We want to talk about its history in general, how it started and what was the purpose of it, how it also started in North Carolina, and then the other aspect that we're going to focus on as well is how diverse our state fair right now and how much it reflects the diversity in North Carolina. We're going to be visiting all of that in today's episode of Eye on the Track. To start with the history of the fair, we have to examine who was the first person and what was the original idea. The first person was Elekna Watson. According to encyclopedia.com, Elekna Watson was a banker and a farmer in Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 1807. Elekna had the idea of raising sheep, and he wanted to convince other farmers to raise sheep as well. He was thinking how to gather everyone to convince them to raise more sheep as their own animals. So Watson thought of the idea of creating the first Berkshire Cattle Show in 1810. And that was the first time where people were gathering to see some sort of a show or even a commodity. And then it's funny to think that our kind of state fair right now is originated from this idea. Watson's idea was successful not only in Massachusetts but in whole of New England, where he was able to gather his fellow citizens to show an idea and also show the importance of the business of farming and its educational value. And that was a kickstart for the state fair in its original idea to not just spread in New England but all over the country. Moving on with the success of the idea, New York held the first state fair in September of 1841, and following this, a lot of states in the Midwest and in the East Coast followed suit. And the state's fair maybe looked different from what we know right now, but it was a space where a lot of businessmen and farmers can share their commodities, whether it's farming techniques, educational purpose to train other farmers, or automobile, solar homes, and different ideas that flourished where people try to exchange ideas of their businesses. So it was more of a conference meeting to a say than, and it looks drastically different from what we think right now. But it's also worth to invest in some time in seeing the history of the state fair here at our own very state, North Carolina. As for North Carolina, the need for an agricultural revolution was also presented, especially in 1852, where the Agriculture Journal editor Dr. John F. Tompkinson decided that he wants to share the improvement of agriculture with North Carolina and teach other North Carolinian farmers to adopt new scientific methods of farming. Therefore, he worked on the North Carolina Agriculture Society to make a revival of this organization to help other farmers to share better techniques of scientific methods of farming. The group tried to think of many different ways to share these techniques, and they found that the state fair idea is one of the most important ideas and most successful one that can help farmers, such as it did in other states, to bring about change into North Carolina. Therefore, the group decided to have another state fair where it was following the same theme of farmers sharing different ideas, different techniques, different machineries with each other. And the city of Raleigh helped in the society to obtain this through giving them fairgrounds and helping them with other construction that will help them to exhibit for holding agriculture exhibits. However, after the Civil War and during the Civil War, it was difficult for the state fair to continue to happen, so it came to an end. However, 4 years after the end of the Civil War, former leaders have tried to revive the North Carolina State Agriculture Society, which was the group that was responsible for carrying out the state fair. The state fair was able to continue after 4 years of not continuing the Civil War in 1869, where the first fair after the Civil War was opened again in the fairgrounds. And it was met with a lot of enthusiastic reception and a lot of welcoming from both the locals, publics in general, and the press. And that was thanks to Thomas Imholtz. Afterwards, he was also able to book a new large site in West Raleigh, which the one we have today. Which actually what we have today as our North Carolina State University campus. And later on, the fairgrounds were moved to the current fairgrounds that we know it today in West Raleigh in 1925. This interesting history in North Carolina and in the state in general have showed us how it's very different from state fair that we know right now in our days. Partially started in Chicago State Fair actually in 1893, where the mechanical rides that we always see and enjoy in the state fair every year has been introduced. And it was also the first place where the Ferris wheel was first introduced there, and it was a big success and remained popular as we can see today for all the time. So it was very interesting to examine the history of the state fair and how it came to be the way it is right now. And I think it's important to also appreciate not only the evolution of the state fair from being for farmers to share ideas and techniques how to farm better to the beautiful dynamic that still includes farmers and still includes different innovative ways of doing a lot of businesses, but also a lot of fun and a lot of rides as we see it and good food. And going on that, I think it's very important to also see how diverse has our state become since the first time we had our state fair. So in this episode, we'll be talking with a lot of diverse vendors who actually wanted to share their food, their culture, and represent how diverse is North Carolina through the state fair. So please stay tuned for the interviews coming up. We're starting our first interview with actually not a food vendor, but a merchandise vendor from Gambia, Africa, who wanted to share the amazing products that he's selling at NC State Fair and also how happy he is sharing this culture with everyone. Hello, so we're here joined by our vendor from NC State Fair. Can you please introduce yourself and what are you selling here at the NC State Fair?
All right. My name is Haji and we're selling like different items. We got like natural products, we got African clothing, we got beaters, we got healthy stuff, we got natural stuff like shea butter, whipped shea butter, African black soap, which is good for the skin. We got multiple choices for you to choose what kind of flavor of soaps you may want, and we got the shea butter too in different flavors, and we got the organic kind of shea butter also.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I was wondering, is this your first year here at the NC State Fair, or have you been here before?
For sure, we've been here. This is our second year, but this is our first time in this particular location, which is the Kiddie Land. Last year we were at the main, Midway, but this year they moved us here, which is also good. It turned out well.
Thank you. And I was wondering what it means for you, like representing African culture here at the NC State Fair with like everyone at North Carolina.
Well, it means well because I'm representing myself. I'm African. I'm from the Gambia. So representing myself is great. So I'm proud of doing that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we were just wondering, do you have any best-selling item here?
Right, our best sellers are the natural products like the shea butter, and also we got the body oils that everybody loves. Young, old, black, white, it don't matter. Across the board, everybody loves our body oils. As you can see, I'm working on some right now, which means they sell it.
Thank you so much. It was so nice talking with Haji, learning more about his products and what he had to share with everyone in North Carolina. Now with our next interview with Newmont restaurant that was also represented at the State Fair with their special touch of mix between Lebanese food and North Carolina local products. From NC State Fair, can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Abdullah Antabli. I'm the Director of Operation with Neomond Mediterranean. We have been a part of the fabric of the triangle for almost 50 years now, and we've been serving customers at the state fair for about 30-ish year. We're also a bread vendor. Our bakery is a bread supplier for the vendors at the fair. We have our essentials, we call them, kebabs and falafels and shawarmas, and Miss Betty here always makes some tweaks to introduce to the community, and they're very well liked. This year's special called kale shawarma. It's a fried kale. It was really influenced by the theme of the state fair. So it is the homegrown, the crops that are grown in North Carolina, but into a Mediterranean style. So we have kale, we have sweet potato, we have beets, we have pomegranate. Pomegranate is not North Carolinian. This is the Lebanese ingredient into the recipe. It is a bowl with sweet potatoes, like I said, beef and lamb shawarma, fried kale, and pomegranate beet dressing. And of course, our famous Booza ice cream that Miss Betty introduced about 3 years ago to the fair, and it's been going viral.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Like, what also other like desserts or special that you're highlighting here in the fair today?
As far as specials, we've been serving lamb nachos for the past, I think, 6 or 7 years. It was meant to be 1 year thing. It was the special back in 2019. We couldn't stop. And now, as you can see on the top of the booth, it says Neomond and loaded lamb nachos right next to it. So we became known as the lamb nachos booth, and we started introducing the lamb idea and doing some specials with the lamb. Desserts, we did not introduce anything that's new, except we do the booze a little bit different here than we do it at the store. At the store, you have the ice cream pre-packed. Here, you have it portioned, and you have Lebanese cotton candy on top of it. So that's what makes it special at the fair.
So, what it means for you to be sharing like Lebanese and Middle Eastern food here with everyone in North Carolina through the restaurant or through like the vendor here at fair?
So we always refer to ourselves as ambassadors of our culture, and what's greater than food to represent your culture and your heritage. We've taken this as a mission. We've sold it our lives. We take it very serious, and not only to share the flavor, but really to share a whole honest ingredients with the community. And we always say what we serve is what we cook at home.
Thank you so much. We're also curious about the buza here. I was trying also to explain like what is buza, and I think if you can help us explain a little bit, like to everyone who doesn't know.
Yes, Bouza is a Lebanese style, actually not just in Lebanon, but the Levant countries. So it's a stretchy ice cream that is made up of mastic gum and orange blossom, rose water, and it's just made very authentically. I practiced for 11 years at home before I introduced it to the community. And it's been like every time I would go back to Lebanon, I would have it and I would say, my gosh, I would love to be able to make this for my family. And that's what happened. I started making it for my grandsons and my grandchildren, and they are the ones that said, Taita, why don't you, think about making this at Neomond? And that's what drove the whole idea.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like it's something that everyone is familiar with being an ice cream, but the flavors are being totally unique and totally like Middle Eastern, Lebanese, and Levant in itself. Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this short interview, and I wish you all the success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
We want you to enjoy.
Wow, really listening to this interview makes me hungry again for some of their lamb nachos. It was really good. However, we can stop here. So we'll be also listening to our interview with La Casa del Sabor, who taught us a lot about what it means for them to present Cuban and Venezuelan food at the fair.
Hello, we're here joined by our vendor today at the fair. Can you please tell us what food are you having today in the fair?
Hi, my name is Carlos Benucci. We sell Venezuelan and Cuban food. This spot is from La Casa del Sabor. They are a food trailer located in Raleigh, and they sell all Cuban plates. Cuban sandwiches, bread with pork. They sell cafecito too. I'm Carlos, and my food truck is a Venezuelan truck. I'm all around on the triangle, doing different places, and we sell Venezuelan food: empanadas, arepas, cachapas. Now here in the fair, we're selling empanadas, shitty beef and shitty chicken, and the Cuban guys are selling Cuban sandwiches.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You have a lot of stuff. We wanted to know, is this your first year at the fair, or have you been here like multiple years around?
Yes, it's our first time in the NC State Fair. We're so proud to be here because I think it's the first time that the Venezuelan food is present in this fair, and also the Cuban, because I never seen that before. So we're so proud to bring our culture, our food to this fair, and everybody's great. We're receiving good reviews. We're receiving good comments from the people, and we're so happy for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting the diversity here in the Triangle. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for coming, record, and everything. Thank you.
Coming up, last but not least, an interview with Safari Eats, which is a food truck by a chef from Mombasa, Kenya, who has a beautiful blend of food that his wife described as the following.
So infused with Indian and Arabics, and that's the same feel that you'll get in the food. It's like that community effect of, just different cultures coming together, and the food, just speaks to that.
After hearing her description of the food, I knew that we have to listen more about what do they have and what do they offer in their truck. So I hope you enjoyed the interview.
Hello, so we're now joined by our vendor here from the fair. Can you please introduce yourself and let us know what are you having and selling in the fair?
My name is Andrew Mlamba with Safari Eats, and this is my wife, a co-partner with me in life and everything. So we are here at this state fair this year. It's our first year to be at the state fair, and we are so delightful, so thankful to be given this opportunity to share the delicious mother's land food. Yeah.
So what are you selling so far? Like what's the best selling item?
So, as I said, the delicious mother type food is our cuisine is Afro infused. So I'm from Africa, I'm from Kenya, and my wife is from Indiana. So we have the mixed cuisine whereby we do American and Kenyan. So our delicious meal is a buffalo mac and bowl, which is sauté collard greens. We don't boil our collard greens. We sauté them with onions and garlic. And we do have a grilled chicken cooked in a way we do back home in Kenya. And then to bring the infused, we do a mac and cheese on top with a buffalo sauce. That's our selling one. And then the second one is the infused, which is a dessert. It's the biggest sell, is the Simba dessert. So the Simba dessert comes on a flatbread called chapati, baked apple, vanilla ice cream with a caramel sauce on top to garnish.
Wow, that sounds so delicious. I was also wondering, is this your first year at the fair, or have you been here in multiple years before?
No, this is our first year at the North Carolina State Fair.
Wow. How does that feel like, and what it means for you to share part of the culture and the fusion here with everyone in North Carolina?
It's amazing because we know how long it takes vendors to get into the North Carolina State Fair. So he went home to Kenya in July and said, I'm going to apply for the state fair. I'm like, we're not ready for the state fair. And after 2 months, she called and said, hey, you guys want to get into the North Carolina State Fair? And we were like, what? It's amazing. So we're very grateful to be here. Yeah,
we're grateful that you guys are here. So we also wanted to ask, how would people find you outside the state fair if they want to enjoy your food further?
So we travel around to different breweries all in the area, Research Triangle area. We go as far out as Sanford, Roxborough. You can find out where we're going to be on our website, or we also post on Facebook and Instagram, and as well as what's that place called? Oh, Street Food Finder shows all of our calendar where we're going to be each week.
Great, thank you so much for talking to us.
You're welcome. Thank
So this is it for our interviews with the diverse vendors at the NC State Fair. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope next year you're at the fair, please try to listen closely to some Afrobeats music mixed with Arab music, mixed with Venezuelan music, which just in the ambience of the fair, mixed with all these amazing smells of food that will be there next to the traditional fair food. I hope you enjoyed the episode. This was Manal Saeed for Eye on the Triangle. Thank you.
This has been your host, Emilia Rivadeneira. Thanks for listening to Eye on the Triangle. For back episodes of the show, go to wknc.org/podcasts. Music in today's episode is Krakatoa by Noah Stark, licensed under Creative Commons.